So this is the state of Nebraska. So Jon, what does Nebraska have to do with you? What do you have to do with Nebraska?
It's where I'm from. So I grew up in a farming community right in the middle of that state, which, interesting fact, since I spent part of my career in Boston, part in San Francisco, the town I grew up in is the exact midpoint between Boston and San Francisco. So we had a bunch of Conestoga wagon museums and that sort of stuff. But I grew up a farmhand.
Great. So you went to this high school, public high school, has 1,600 today, according to Wikipedia, if you believe it. How many were in your high school when you were there?
280 in my class.
Yeah.
So not small. It was the main high school for all the farms and ranches in those communities in that area, and everybody came in, and you could get a driver's license when you were 12. If you lived more than 5 miles from school, and that worked because everybody started driving tractors when they were 8. So you'd get a few books to sit on. They'd stack a few pieces of little 2x4 pieces to reach the accelerator, and you could drive to school. And some people drove to school for an hour each way.
So were you a John Deere or Caterpillar guy?
Definitely John Deere.
Yeah.
That's funny you asked that question. That's a religious question out there.
Yeah. So is this middle school or is this high school?
That's I don't know. How did you find this?
Yeah. So you're third in, and that's a young Jon McNeill.
Yeah.
And then how about this? This looks like it's South Dakota.
Yeah, I think it's like a middle school or high school trip to Mount Rushmore. Yeah. See, I hung out with the most intellectual crowd.
And then how about this? Is this high school?
That's high school. Yeah, that's high school on a basketball trip, I think.
Yeah. And so when you were in high school, did you do odd jobs? Did you start any businesses? You know, you've done a lot in your life, but maybe paint a picture of what you were like. This is still high school, right?
I did. I don't know if there are any educators in the room, but I wasn't going to tell this story, but I'll tell this story because you brought it up. So I was a bored and troublemaking kid in middle school. So much so that one night I thought it might be fun to move one of our neighbor's cars from his driveway to a couple blocks away so he could wake up in the morning, it wouldn't be there and he'd have to find it. The problem was he was a police officer and I moved the police car, and so I got in a little bit of trouble, and that was just one of the many things. And so my middle school principal came to me at the end of our 8th grade year, I think. And he had me come to the principal's office, and I knew the way there, and I knew the office really well. And he sat me down and he said, "Hey, I think you're going to choose one or two paths in life, but I think one of them might be you might end up in jail." And so he said, "I have the assistant principal is in there with him, and they said we have this landscaping business, this commercial landscaping business. We do it during the summer because we're teachers. It's something that we've got a painting business and landscaping business. We don't want to do landscaping anymore, so we're giving it to you." And I said, "What?" And they said, "We're giving you this landscaping business." I said, "I'm 14, I can't even drive." And they said, this is a lasting quote that literally changed the course of my life. He looked at me and said, "We have faith in you. You will figure this out." I'd never had an adult say anything like that to me before. And then I knew I couldn't let those two guys down. So that ended up being a business with over 100 commercial accounts in high school, and it paid for my college. And it kept me out of jail, which is really good.
So you went to Northwestern.
I did.
Good memories there?
I did. Oh, yeah, great memories there. I was still working, and so I had to work my way through college, and so I got a job as a runner on the board of trade. So all my classes were stacked in the mornings. I would get on the L and go downtown and be a runner. And after about a week, they figured out I could code. And so they moved me right up to the trading desk to code algorithms for derivatives. And so it couldn't have been more applied education. It was awesome.
And so this was
I was working on the Merck and the SIBO and the Board of Trade, for the largest, at the time, the largest options and trading firm in the world.
So trading $10 to $20 million?
One of the trades that I had to hit the button on, I remember, was like a $10 million trade, and I was literally shaking. Yeah.
Right.
I was hoping my algorithm was right.
Great. And then who are you with here?
Oh, that's my mom.
Yeah.
So my mom was a school teacher and super into academics and gave me a love of reading.
Yep. And then she is with who here?
My dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then who? How about this?
That's our son Connor.
Yeah. And your daughter went to Colorado College, is that right?
She was here at Harvard. She rode lightweights at Harvard here.
Yeah. But your son went to Notre Dame.
He did. Yeah.
Okay,
So this
so
is our visit, high school visit. There's no better marketing than for the admissions department to send you to a Notre Dame game.
Yeah. So we're going to touch on this, but this is foreshadowed in the book. What's the relevance of this restaurant in Chicago?
So we took our son and so Alinea, a lot of you probably know of Alinea, 3 Michelin stars, was in the teens, consistently rated the top restaurant in the world, and it's complete avant-garde restaurant where they literally throw the food on the table and there's music going and like it's just a scene. And so we took our son and our now daughter-in-law there to celebrate their graduation from college. And I was working at Tesla at the time, and somehow they figured out I was like a manufacturing geek, and so they said, "Would you like to come back to the kitchen?" And so like before the first course, we're in the kitchen, and I'm watching Grant, the head chef, and he starts explaining to me how he set the kitchen up. So basically, you could do your job without taking a step. And so people were pivoting around to like the ingredients they needed, the tooling they needed, the stove or the oven they needed, and it was like it looked like the way a car manufacturer looks in the what we call the body shop, where you build the skeleton of the car, where robots are just rotating around all the time. It was really, really cool.
Great. And here's Dad. And am I right that this is the Pan Mass Challenge, and you were celebrating him?
Yeah.
That he passed with cancer, and you were biking for him.
Yeah, I bike for him every year now, and anybody that has pancreatic cancer.
Yep. Great. All right. So before we go on to your professional career, what in your childhood first hinted that you would become a builder and a leader? Because you built multiple companies, you were helped take Tesla from $2 billion to $20 billion at a key time when only had 90 days of cash and could have gone down the tubes. And you're on a bunch of boards that have a big impact on the global economy. And now you have a venture studio where you're building companies. When did you realize you could be a builder?
In second, I think it was second or third grade. Some of you are my age, so I'm going to reveal my age. But we watched Starsky and Hutch, and it was the first time I'd seen a pair of Nikes. And all of a sudden, they were a rage for every kid to have a pair of Nikes. And so I said to my dad, like, "Hey, could we get a pair of Nikes?" And we were proud and frequent Sears shoppers, and so I had Nike knockoffs. And he said, "Well, we can't afford that." But he said, "You can earn the money yourself, and you can buy a pair of shoes." So I said, "Well, what do I do?" I'm like in second grade, and he said, "Well, why don't you look around? Like, what do you see? What job do farmers hate that you could convince them to let you do?" And I knew the first answer to that was mowing ditches. Every farmer hates mowing ditches because you find a lot of stuff underneath that tall grass that you wish you wouldn't have mowed over. And so he said, "Great, like why don't you just go ask the farmers if you can mow their ditches? You can use their equipment." And so I just went like farm to farm and as a second grader and earned enough money to buy a pair of Nikes. And that was the first time I felt agency. So that probably was the clue.
Great. And so building on that, when did you realize you were capable of leading at extraordinary scale? I mean, we're going to get into that.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't. And so when Elon and I were getting to know each other, I kept saying to him, "Don't you need a big company guy?" And he kept saying to me, "That is exactly the opposite of what I need." He operates under this principle that I then learned is called orthogonal hiring, which is you hire somebody who is not qualified for the job in any way other than they're creative and they have a drive and they have intellect. And I don't know if I had the last one, but I definitely had the first two. He said, "That's exactly what I don't need. I don't need a big company guy. I don't need a big company car guy. I need a fellow entrepreneur." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, because we operate this company." It was about 1.8 billion in sales at the time. Like you operate any scaling startup, and that is I only allow a quarter's worth of cash to be on the balance sheet, because if there's more than that, then the team gets soft. And so if you're within steps of death, the team stays sharp. And I need somebody to get me down to 1 day a week at Tesla who understands the entrepreneurial challenge of, like he describes as eating glass and looking into the abyss, which is pretty true. And second, that you know how to allocate capital. Those are the skills I need. And but I kept saying, like, I don't know if I can do this at scale.
Right, so let's see how you got there. So these guys usually hire Ivy Leaguers, and while I think Northwestern was considered for the Ivy League,
it's not in the Ivy League.
It's not in the Ivy League. So how did you get a job at Bain? Were you a good fit, and did you thrive there, or was it an epic fail?
So I was they only hired, Bain only hired Ivy Leaguers at the time. And so there's a guy that was leading recruiting then. I still remember his name because he gave me this break. His name is Rick Crozier. Some of you know Rick or have worked with Rick. I talked Rick into giving me an interview. I said, hey, look, I'm in town to interview with these smaller Bain spinoffs. So the price for you to interview me is $0. And I had just done this $10 million trade. I said, yeah, I bet you won't talk to many college kids in the Ivy League who's done a $10 million trade this week. And he like, that got him, and he agreed to give me a half hour, and I basically talked my way into Bain and got hired there. And that ended up being a life changer too, because I learned so much in such a short period of time. I didn't grow up in a business household, so I didn't know what sales, marketing, and operations and finance and everything that a CEO has to grapple with. I hadn't had any exposure, and then 4 years later, I'd had a lot of exposure and a lot of great mentoring and teaching from the people I worked with.
And that was a special cohort of the 75 that they hired. How many went on to be lifelong consultants?
0. Well, I take that back, maybe 3. So I was in a class of 72, and at the last count we did, 44 of those 72 became CEOs. Just an incredible, like, I don't know what was in the water or what was in their hiring screen at that point, but founding CEO of Ticketmaster, founding CEO of SurveyMonkey, founding CEO of you name, I could go company by company, and just like, these are not small companies.
So when you were at Bain, you had a meat packing gig, and I guess that put you on track to meet Elon. Maybe talk a little bit about that meat packing gig and how it shaped you.
So I think this was the revenge of being the non-Ivy League kid. So, you go through training, and then there's a lot of pomp and circumstance to get your first case assignment. My first case assignment was Iowa Beef, meatpacking company in the Midwest. And so I get onto this team. Turns out it's a great group of people, but I ended up meeting my closest friend, this guy Dave Goldberg. He'd gone to Harvard, and he was from Minnesota, and they'd seen that in his resume. And so we got assigned this meatpacking plant in southern Minnesota and in northwest Iowa. And so we became lifelong friends, Dave and I. And we were in this meatpacking plant trying to help really sort the business in Storm Lake, Iowa. And the plant manager there was sort of an operational genius. And he had a friend at MIT who was a professor named Ellie Goldratt. And Ellie was writing this book and would mail copies of the drafts to this plant manager of this meatpacking plant. Super strange, like, connection there. And one night it got to he came out with this book he'd photocopied a copy for each of Dave and I. And this book is called The Goal. I don't know if you've read The Goal, but it was seminal for a lot of us who were learning manufacturing. You've read, yeah. So, like, when young people ask me, like, give me one book to read, I'm like, read The Goal. And we just happened to have it photocopied and handed to us there. And so, our manager at the time, our partner on the case, he felt sorry for us. He could see we were super bummed out to be 5 days a week in a meatpacking plant. We literally couldn't take our suits on the plane back to Boston because they smelled so bad. And so he made this deal with us. He said, you can fly anywhere on the weekend that is a cheaper ticket than going back to Boston. And so Goldie turned to me and he said, do you know how to ski? And I said, no, I grew up in Nebraska, Pan Flat. He said, I don't either. Let's fly to Colorado and learn to ski. So we flew to Colorado, and we would just fall down the mountain every weekend. And then one weekend I broke my thumb, and so we go back to the meatpacking plant. I've got this huge cast on, and the meatpacking guy said, what happened to you this weekend? We're like, trying to make up a story. It wasn't skiing, but Dave and I became lifelong friends, and it was at his Shiva that I met Elon.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So 4 years at Bain Consulting, and then Bain Capital. What kind of relationship would you have with them?
So this was great. Like, I had this sense that I could be an entrepreneur, and there was Mark Nunnally and Mike Krupka and Michael Fleischer were just getting what's today Bain Ventures started, but then it was called Information Partners. And I sat next to Mike and Mike, who were the two junior guys on that team, and they kept saying, like, we should back you in a business. Find a business plan, and we'll back you. And then Mike Krupka handed me one day, And I was like, this is it. I got to meet this technical co-founder. And so 3 months later, we launched a company, and Bain backed it, and we were off to the races.
Great. And how about this company? This is your second?
That was our second company, yeah. So my wife's car got hit, and we took it to Stadium Auto Body behind Harvard Stadium, and the guy said it'll be done on Friday. We drop it off on Monday. Go on Friday, it's not done. And he said, parts didn't come in, it'll be next Friday. This happened 5 Fridays in a row, and finally I said, like, I just got to come hang out here and understand how this business operates. It was complete chaos. And I'd just been in like some of the top, most advanced manufacturing facilities in the world, and so I got this vision for, I bet you could like apply these techniques to this business, and then started to research.
So you get down to 1 week?
Found out it was a $50 billion industry, and the average cycle time was a 18-day cycle time. And so I asked the guy, I said, what's the average hours you bill on a car? And he said 6. You do the math pretty quick. You could then get on a 1-day cycle time and change the industry. So we did. So we launched this company. We put our stores next to Home Depot's high traffic retail areas, because 60% of the consumers who drop off a car at a body shop are female. They don't want to be in a back alley behind Harvard Stadium. They want to be in a well-lit retail area. And our angle was you get your car back in a day or less. And we grew that thing from 0 to 150 million in sales in the first 2 years, and then went to $250 million in sales in 3. It was really rapid. It was backed by Bain and General Catalyst and Berkshire Partners, and it was just a great second run.
Yep.
And then was bought by Allstate.
You're doubling down on your car stuff. And then Toyota, was the professor that the book, or is this different?
No, I got a board member at Sterling. They could see that like the thing was growing so fast. And Berkshire Partners had seen this movie before, I think, where the business starts to grow so fast it outgrows the CEO. So they put this guy on the board who is a legend in the auto business, and he had run several big automotive businesses and had 60 some odd plants around the world. His name is Fred Missoni, and Fred was the first American taught by the Japanese. Mm-hmm. And so he became my mentor and taught me the Toyota production system. And that was like the goal on steroids.
Great. We're next going to, after this, go into your Tesla life, but this was someone who's influential to you. Maybe say something about him.
Yeah, so you might see this guy running around this place. So this is Jeff Schwartz, and Jeff, at the time Bain Ventures backed 3 or 4 of my 6 companies, and so I had this long run with them. And Jeff was somebody I got to know. He was a partner at Bain Ventures, didn't back my companies, but I watched him. He backed several super entrepreneurs in town, and one of the guys was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer and ended up spending about 6 weeks in the hospital on the brink of death. And Jeff was there every day, and I'd never seen an investor with that kind of dedication to a CEO. Most investors would have written the company off and stepped back, and Jeff was a example for me from afar of what the humanity of leadership looks like. So I wrote a post last fall about mentors who don't know their mentors, and Jeff was a mentor to me without knowing it, because I was just watching his humanity in action. And then several years later, our head of China, when I was at Tesla, was working so hard. He was a young guy, he had a heart attack, and he's in a hospital in Shanghai, and I got on a plane because of what I'd learned from Jeff.
Great. I'm sure you're mentoring people by doing that action too, just as he did, as Schwartz did for you. All right, so Tesla, so your buddy in the meatpacking consultancy ends up marrying Sheryl Sandberg, and he has a tragic death on a treadmill. I think that's probably why you welled up a moment ago. But Sheryl introduced you to Elon Musk, and then you became the president. Was it that easy, like in the first few seconds?
No, it wasn't.
What was the courtship like? And you just told us a story how you went to the back of the restaurant when you were celebrating your son's graduation. How you weren't satisfied when your wife's car wasn't fixed fast enough. What was the courtship like? And how'd you kick the tires to see if it was a good fit? And how'd you convince a guy that's pretty unique that you were his Sheryl Sandberg, the way Sheryl and Mark worked together?
So Dave and Cheryl and I, we kept this commitment post meatpacking that we would ski together once a year for the rest of our lives. That was this commitment we made to each other. And so we would ski together, and so I got to know Dave and Cheryl, and then when their kids came along, and we were, that's why I welled up, because it's super close. And so I went out to sit Shiva with Cheryl, which I realized as a Roman Catholic, like a wake is a tough thing to get through, but 4 nights of Shiva, it was so hard. And the kids were 9 and 11 at this point, and Cheryl said, "Hey, there's this guy that's been sort of courting me to be his president, but I'm an ad person. I keep telling him he needs to meet somebody, so I'm going to introduce you guys." So she introduced us, and he's a pretty intense guy, as you probably can gather. And so, like, immediately he's like, "Hey, nice to meet you. I love Dave too. You ever seen this problem in manufacturing?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have actually." And so we started to break the problem down, and 2 hours later, we're still talking. And so we hang up, agree to talk again. He's like, "I'm going to go to the factory and do what we just put the solution in place we just architected." I get a call back 2 days later. He's like, "I did it, and throughput is up like 20% or something. It was incredible. Can you come to SpaceX next week?" And so I went out. I happened to be in LA and went to SpaceX, and we spent another couple hours on the floor at SpaceX, which is like, for a nerd, this is nerd nirvana. I'm in a rocket factory. CNC machines are like carving fuselages out of titanium. This is unbelievable. And we solved another manufacturing problem there, and he kept throwing these cases at me, basically. He was doing a case interview series. And then finally he said, like, "I want you to join." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure I'm your guy." And
what year was this?
This is 2014.
Okay, so I took this photo of Elon in 2014. You know, he's come a long way since then, but
yeah,
this is the guy.
Yeah.
This was 2015, 2016. These photos here, and here he is more recently. But I'm curious, what was he like then that people may not realize?
So he wasn't as well known, and he was basically just enamored with engineering problems. And so, but I think what people don't know about him is he is like literally the funniest person I've ever worked with. Like, when he is in public, he is so nervous that this doesn't come across. But every once in a while, like your partner Dave London got him a little bit this way on the Moonshot podcast a couple of months ago. When he gets comfortable, he starts to joke around, and when he starts to joke around, he is hilarious. And so there are more meetings that I left crying because I was laughing so hard than any place I've ever been. But he's also pretty prolific.
So let me just go back to your hiring process. So, you know, in your book, you write about how you made a big decision for the company without even being on the payroll or official. Can you maybe share that story? Because I think it says a lot about you, shares a lot about Elon, and shares a lot about you know, the situation. Yeah.
So I kept saying to him, like, I think you need a bigger company person, because this company right now is twice as big as my biggest company. And he kept pushing, and I said, "Okay, finally, let me see if I can be useful to you." And I got to know that before I sign on, that I can actually do something and be helpful. And so I went. He told me, like, the way that electric cars were sold at that point, they were the only one really in town. And so the fulcrum of the sales process was you would get in a car on a test drive, and the sales rep would say, "Hit the accelerator," and you would have this out-of-body experience of being launched in a rocket. And some of you are nodding, you've had this experience in an electric car. There's no delay in torque, so it's actually faster off the line than the fastest car, production cars on Earth: Ferrari, Lotus, Lamborghini, Maserati, McLaren, etc. And so I decided to go out, and I asked him, "What's your biggest challenge?" And he said, "Well, we've committed to sell like 12,000 cars this quarter, and I don't think we're going to make our quarter," which is pretty typical for Tesla. They weren't making quarters. And so I said, "Okay, top line's your biggest problem. Let me go look into that." So I went to 8 different stores. I started out in Natick at the Natick Mall. And then I was flying around the country, so I just used a different email address in every store, and I'd sign up for a test drive, and I'd go on the test drive, and it'd be an amazing experience. But then something weird happened. I didn't get a call for like a week. And so Elon had introduced me to the head of sales ops, and so I called the guy and said, am I flagged in the system for some reason? He said, "No, why?" He said, "Well," I said, "I've done 8 test drives, I understand that's the fulcrum of getting somebody to buy a car. And I understand you got this big challenge. You don't have enough people buying cars, and I'm not getting called back at the fulcrum of the sales process. I said, can you tell me how many test drives you've given where in the last month and a half, so we're a month and a half into the quarter, how many cars have been test driven but haven't been called back? And by the way, how many cars have you sold so far? And he's like, 3,000. I'm like, okay, you're a month and a half into the quarter, you're not going to make your quarter of 12,000. So how many have done test drives and not been called back? So he gets on the phone an hour later, says I ran the report, and it's 9,000. And I'm like, all right, you can make your quarter. This is good news. So I said, do me a favor. Do you have the ability to shut off all new leads to sales reps? They can't take a single new lead until they've called back all their test drive customers. And he said, I can do that. I said, great, do it. So he does it. It goes into effect that afternoon globally. And he calls me back the next day. He's like, you won't believe it, we're selling cars. And I said, yeah, because you're calling people back. It's like the easiest thing in the world. Then I had this shot in the gut. I was like, oh my God, I've made a decision. I don't even work at this company. This is not my company. I'm used to being a CEO. And so I call Elon. I'm like, hey, I got a big forgiveness here. Here's the situation. I described the whole thing. I said, but I don't work for you yet, and I was in CEO mode, so I just made a decision on your behalf for your company. And he said, I've already heard about the result. The result is sales are up like 25%. We're going to make our quarter. And I said, yeah. And then I had this long period of silence, which I did not know was part of the package with him, but now I think a lot of people do. But it went on for like 60 or 90 seconds to the point where I was like, are you still there? And all that 60 or 90 seconds, all I could think was, man, I've really overstepped my bounds, and this is probably the last conversation we'll have. And he gets on like at 60 seconds later, and I've learned that that's just processing. Like he likes to shut down all sensory stuff so he can let the compute run in his head. And he comes back on and says, I think you're going to do great here. Why don't you sign up? And I still said, I'm not sure I'm your guy. And then he's super good at the promote. So he stuck the knife in the back and twisted. He said, so what are you going to tell your kids and grandkids when you're sitting on the porch, when you're retired? How much impact did you have on this world? Oh my God. All right, sign me up.
Great. So I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but as some of you know, I run the MIT Stanford event at Davos during the World Economic Forum. We have a 56,000 square foot dome, and it's adjacent to where WEF happens. And Elon wasn't supposed to be on the program. The last day when most heads of state had left, he flew in, and I heard him speak, and he said, I'm going to tell you the most revolutionary stuff, and then he gave a talk that wasn't really revolutionary. Okay, so this is Elon recently. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your Tesla days. So you showed up and they had one product.
Exactly, this was the only product we sold at that point.
So where did your leadership play on this car, or were you focused on other things?
It didn't. This one had been out for 2.5 years. So this is the Model S. It had been out for 2.5 years, and we were on the precipice when I started of launching Model X, which is the car with the Falcon Wing doors. There it is. And this was like just a few weeks into the job. What Elon and I we'd sort of divided and conquered. He said, I want to hang on to engineering and product and manufacturing, and you can have the rest. I was off working on the rest, which is sales, delivery, finance, government relations, marketing, anything that's not those things.
And the budget, you also had control.
Yeah, the marketing budget was, as he would describe it, precisely zero. So I had this whopping marketing budget to be really creative with. So we're trying to release Model X, and we cannot get these Falcon Wing doors to fit.
Now, did you think they were a good idea, or you're not going to comment
on that? This is behind, that ship had sailed. So now we're into prototype manufacturing, and there was no redoing this. We're stuck, basically. And again, we have 90 days worth of cash, but we have 70 days worth of payables. So we essentially, for you finance geeks in the room, we have 3 weeks of cash. And we can't produce these things, and they start to pile up in the parking lot. So we have 1,200 finished Model X's in the parking lot we cannot ship to customers because the doors don't fit flush. And you can take $120,000 each times 1,200 of these things, and you can see that that is a big pile of cash we need. So we run into each other at the coffee station, and literally almost physically ran into each other. And he said, "Hot potato, it's yours." And I was like, "Hey, we had a deal. Like, you were taking this stuff, I was taking this stuff." And he's like, "I've been sleeping in the factory. We cannot solve this problem. You're the gold guy. You're the Toyota guy. Come on the floor and help us."
And so at this point, every Tuesday you were meeting with Elon one-on-one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And at this point, had you slept overnight in the factory?
No, but that night I slept in the factory because it turned out like we started to deploy these rather advanced techniques from Toyota, and the problem was moving around the factory, and it would move around shift to shift, and so I felt like I needed to see all 3 shifts. So I started to.
But it's a mile-long assembly line?
It's 1.2 miles long, so it's like I lost a lot of weight running back and forth. But we slept in the factory, and we could not solve this problem, and it was vexing. And the way the car is manufactured is it sits on a tray for the whole 1.2 mile trip down the assembly process, and then at the very last minute, it gets its shoes. So it gets the wheels for the first time, and then it gets to sit under its own weight for the first time. And I could see these 7,000-pound cars bowing. And there's super good lighting at the end of an assembly line because you're looking for any defect. And I could see like what looked like a bow to me, but it was like I knew it was like my eye. So then I took a straight edge over, and I could see the bow.
Yeah, and that's why the door wasn't. That was the problem.
It turned like I went to the head of engineering and said, like, you're gonna want to punch me when I ask you this question, but I have to ask you this question: did you ever run the CADs, the computer-aided designs, with the car under its own weight?
Yeah.
And he's like, "That's an offensive question. Of course, like we're the best engineers in the world." And I said, "Yeah, but it's Boeing."
Yeah.
And he said, "It's not Boeing." I took him over. I put the straight edge on the roof. I showed him, and he said, "Let me go check." And he came back, and he's like, "Do not tell Elon. We didn't run the CADs. We didn't run the CADs."
So let's look at this. So were these the products that were under your watch that were being developed? And maybe tell us some stories here. And that truck, was that your idea?
That was not my idea. That was a guy named Jerome. Which one, the Cybertruck or the Semi?
The Cybertruck.
The Cybertruck was Elon's idea. He plays a lot of video games, so he'd seen in this video game this car that he wanted to produce. And so Doug Field and I, Doug was the head of engineering at the time. Doug now runs EVs at Ford. And Doug and I talked him out of that product probably 5 times because we're like, here's the logic. Large pickups are a North American product. You can't drive them in Europe or Asia because the roads are too narrow. So it's a North American and maybe a little bit of Central American product. And this thing is so big and so unique that it's going to be an exotic. It's going to have a really small addressable market. So we can't afford the cash to make this thing right now. And we put that thing off 5 times, and after Doug and I left, there was no resistance.
They snuck it in. Yeah. Anything else you want to share about this product line?
I was really proud of the Model 3, which is right up here, that led to the Model Y. The Model Y is the best-selling car in the world, single model car in the world still today, and we designed that in 2016, 2017. Before you start production, you run cars manually, and so they're called mules, and so everybody's building the car by hand, and the parts aren't even finalized yet, so you're using prototype parts. And so the 7th car that came off the line, they were going to give to the executive teams the first 10 cars. And the 7th car that came off the line, they said, "This one's yours, we're going to put VIN number 7 on it." And I said, "No, I'm from Boston, you're going to put VIN number 33 on there, please." So my car's named Larry.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice. In the book, maybe just summarize the story. I throw this up here because you told an amazing story about the month-long training for your employees that under your watch, you changed that to not a month.
Yeah, so I decided to write a book about the operating system, how Tesla really works, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But one of the core principles is to question requirements and then simplify like crazy. And so we had a training program for our store reps that was 4 weeks long. And basically it's a mixture of classroom and on-the-job training so you get to know the product. And we were going from delivering 12,000 cars a quarter to 20,000 to 100,000 to 250,000. So the thing was scaling almost logarithmically. We went from 4,000 to 40,000 people in about 30 months. And we were hiring people so fast that we didn't have time to train them before they went to the floor. And Model 3, it was coming out. We needed now a bunch of new people on the sales force to sell and deliver cars. And so I asked my team, I said, we got to take training down from a month to a week at most. And I'll really be psyched if you can get it down to a day. And simplification is some of the hardest things that you do. Like Twain's line, I would have written you a shorter letter if I would have taken the time, is definitely true. It's hard work to simplify. And the best simplifiers in our world are well known. You take Einstein, who simplified gravity so we could explain it to ourselves, which leads to quantum physics. And these guys were doing the same kind of hard work on the training program, as silly as that sounds. And they came back a month later with smiles ear to ear. And they said, we want to meet with you on your training challenge. We haven't gotten it down to a week or a day. We've gotten it down to a sentence. And I was like, okay, try me. And they said, well, Tesla is, the culture we try to create in stores is all about doing something awesomely surprising for a customer at least once a day. So we challenge ourselves to that. So they said, okay, we're going to boil training down to one statement, and then the people can figure the rest out based on this one statement. But the one statement is make them talk about you at dinner tonight. And it kind of sat with me. And I thought, oh, this is perfect, because this translates to all 36 languages that we have stores present in those countries. They can all think this way, and that is the core of what we want people to do. So they don't have to have perfect product knowledge, but they got to help us really bring hospitality to that customer.
So for time, I'm going to go to the next story I want you to talk about, but there's some interesting anecdotes about this in the book. So if you want to know about that. All right, why are you building a tent next to your factory? Did you know this was being built, and what was the use of this tent?
This operating framework that we use to innovate on a weekly basis at Tesla, we eventually named the algorithm, and so that's why the book's called The Algorithm. So the first step is you question all requirements. Second is you delete all unnecessary steps. Third is you build a new process manually. And then fourth is you speed it up, because speed reveals the flaws of any process, and then you automate last, which sounds super weird for Silicon Valley people. But we violated each of these principles along the way, and so we would do postmortems and say, how the heck did we get here, and how do we avoid getting here again? And automate last became one of these, and this was a direct result of this. So you might remember in 2017-ish, Elon starts talking about the alien dreadnought, creating the most advanced manufacturing facility in the world, the machine that would create the machine. And he takes on as his personal project, he's leading the engineers that are going to create the Model 3 production factory. And they create a digital twin, and they start to develop the factory completely digitally. And several of us were expressing discomfort with this, because we know that you can't foresee everything in a digital world, and so literally you got to do stuff in a manual world first, but they were having none of it. So eventually the machines show up, they start to get installed in the factory, and I start to do a walkthrough with him and the team, and I notice the machines are like 6 inches apart, because he really wants to have the smallest floor print per unit produced as one of his metrics. And I said, guys, these machines are mechanical instruments. They are going to come out of calibration. They're going to need to be recalibrated several times a day. They're going to need to be repaired. What human do we know that can get into a 6-inch crack between machines? And they sort of looked at me and they went, oh my God. And I said, yeah, oh my God. Like we can't run this line. And it turned out that line got fully built and never produced a car.
That's a record.
Yeah. And this story wasn't really told outside of Tesla for a lot of reasons, and because people were predicting our bankruptcy and they weren't wrong. And so Jerome Guillen, who had developed the Model S, so he's the head of product for Model S, brilliant guy, said, we're going to go do what we do in every one of our businesses outside of this instance, we're going to go manual. And so in true Tesla fashion, he builds this tent over the weekend that has 7,000 people working in it. This is ginormous. If you saw the air shot, this thing's ginormous. And because this tent could have no conveyor belts, we literally took the trucks that were supplying parts, put the trailer next to the tent walls, and the workers would go onto the truck, grab the parts they needed, and then go back and build the cars. And it turns out that Jerome, in that manual stroke of genius, designed our Shanghai factory, which is the most, yeah, there it is. So you see all the trucks lined up against the sides? About a third of the capex that goes into a factory is what's called conveyance. It's conveyor belts. This factory has none because the workers just go onto the trucks, grab the parts they need for like the next hour. And so there's no conveyance. And every car facility or manufacturing facility that's been built since is built this way. And it was built because we figured it out as we were manually building Model 3s in Jerome's tent.
So, from running the lawnmower business in high school to running this, you've come a long way. All right, this is a really interesting case study. Can you explain why this had never been done before and how Elon challenged you to do something that seemed absolutely impossible in negotiating with China, and what is the significance of this?
So as I got to know Elon, one of the things that became pretty apparent is that he would set goals not at a 5 to 10% growth, but like at what he would usually do is an order of magnitude. So he would tell me, you need to double the company from a $2 billion base every 8 months. So that's how we went from 2 to 20 in 30 months. We went from 2 to 22 really in 30 months. And so he's always setting these big goals because his argument was if you set the goal at 5 or 10%, people are going to solve for 5 to 7%. And that's what you get. But if you ask them for an order of magnitude, you're going to get, if you get 60% of that, you're psyched. And so we were contemplating where we were going to grow outside the United States and Europe. And the United States, the size of the new car market in the United States every year is about 15 million units, and China's 30 million units. So it's twice as big. It's the biggest car market in the world. So pretty obvious we got to get there. But our teams in China tell us, well, there's one requirement of the Chinese government, and that is that you enter into a joint venture where you split 50-50 economics. Which you're going to split 50-50 economics. Now the U.S. market is the same size as the Chinese market. It's a little less interesting. So at this point, like Elon gets one of the sparkles in his eye, and he turns to me and he says, "How would you like to be the guy that negotiates the first entity in China of a Western company that's not a joint venture?" So he's doing the first step of the algorithm. He's questioning the requirement. Do you need to have a joint venture? And I said what we typically said, which is I have no idea how to do that. Google doesn't have it, Procter & Gamble doesn't have it, GM doesn't have it, Apple doesn't have it. I don't know how the heck we're going to get it, but challenge accepted. I'll give it a try. So I sat down with our China team, and our China team explained to me that like the structure of how Chinese government works. Super quick. All the top grads in China come out of the top schools, so the equivalent of Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, et cetera, Stanford. They get divided into two groups. One goes into industry and one goes into government. If you go into government, you're given a neighborhood. And your first job, the only metric that you're going to be measured by is growing jobs in that neighborhood. And if you do well, you get a bigger neighborhood, and then you get a section in the city, then eventually you might become a mayor, and the metric for the entire government, up and down from the bottom to the top, is one metric, and that is job growth. And you can triple your cash salary by hitting your goals. And so the best of the best go into government, and the rest of the best go into industry, and they work super tightly together to create jobs. And every 5 years, they release a 5-year economic plan, and that has 5 industries that they want to dominate. And so I asked our China team, hand me that plan so I could read it, and I read it, and the 5 industries were batteries, electric cars, solar panels, ASIC chips, and they started to think about autonomy. So I was like, okay, we're 5 for 5. So anybody I'm negotiating with, I'm delivering them their bonus if we can bring Tesla to this country. So we negotiated for 14 months and just kept kept having this repeated line like, we are not sharing economics. We'd love to come, but we're not sharing economics. We can't afford to. And they needed our tech so bad that eventually they said yes. And we understood that was the trade we were making, because we understood that we were probably so well infiltrated just in the US that we really couldn't hide our tech. And so it was given the sleeves off our shirt. So eventually this was built in less than a year. They're so good at construction.
All right, so I got a few slides I want to just jump through, and then I'm going to have you present on your book. So SpaceX, you spent once a week there.
Mm-hmm.
There was some design and fab there. Just explain what that scene was like, and what was it like interacting with Elon there?
So the head of design at Tesla is based in LA, and so the design center where all the cars are designed is designed at this little corner of the SpaceX lot in Hawthorne. So there's a little airport south of LA. It looks like Bedford, and that's where there's a bunch of hangars, and that's where SpaceX is at this little private airport. And over in the corner is the design team of about 150 people that design the cars.
Great.
And we spent every Friday morning there, and then we would interact with there were people that had jobs at both SpaceX and Tesla that we'd interact with, like the head of materials and head of manufacturing. Those people would move back and forth between the two companies.
So you mentioned that you did stay overnight in a Tesla factory. Elon is there are stories of how he slept on the floor.
Yeah.
And I don't know, mental health, how he has these swings. But did you ever sleep on the floor with him and ever have conversations with him on the floor?
We didn't snuggle, but we were definitely. There was this conference room down on the factory floor in Fremont that had long benches along the walls, and so we had sleeping bags in there, and that's where we would sleep if we needed to be working the problem across shifts. Mm-hmm. And we'd often say to each other, I would guarantee you that the CEO of Ford is not sleeping in a sleeping bag in their factory tonight. Yeah. It was more a poke at us than at him because we couldn't get it right. But yeah, we spent a lot of nights in that.
All right, so let me just jump through a few slides. So EVs, you spent a lot of time building a company from 2 billion to 20 billion, and you were in the EV space. What's your take on EVs today? I know, I think there's a deal where we're paying some French company billions not to have windmills to help with the petro economy in the U.S. But what's the future of EVs?
When I just started at Tesla, the chief engineer at Audi gave me a huge gift, and he had done this all hands that got recorded and then leaked. And this all hands was a rallying cry to his engineers in Germany. And what he said was that we have a problem. When people try EVs, they will not go back, and therefore we have to transform an industry, and we have to transform ourselves. And I use that quote a lot. As I watched economies around the world and consumers around the world sort of come to the realization that, if you're a person that likes to drive, for the last 150 years, car engineers have been fighting physics, and that is all the weight of the cars in the front and the engine, and so they do a lot of tricks in the rest of the car to counterbalance that weight. But it makes those cars slide and skid and do all kinds of crazy stuff that if the weight was in the center of gravity of the car, wouldn't happen. And so you drop a several thousand-pound battery in the center of gravity of the car, and the thing is like a slot car. You can. I test drove on the racetrack at GM last fall a Cadillac Escalade IQ, which is this huge car, and I could corner it like I was driving the Corvette that I drove next. Yeah. It's just crazy. So consumers are better experience, lower cost of ownership, and in Norway, 90% of cars sold are these. In Europe, 60%, China, 60 to 70%. So you see the way the rest of the world has gone, and there's only so long that the U.S. is going to be able to defy gravity. Well, otherwise, we're not going to have a place in this market, and this is 5% of our GDP. So automotive is 5% of our GDP.
Are EVs ahead of adoption of where you thought they would be at this point?
They are ahead in the rest of the world and behind in the U.S. We were starting in the U.S. to really have adoption, because we had a super injection of incentive under the Biden administration, and then then we did a 180 in this administration. But still, if you look at trend leading states, close to 50% of cars sold in California are electric.
Yeah.
40% of cars sold in Colorado are electric. And this is it's a resistance that's not going to be long for them.
So you mentioned autonomy before, and autonomy is not just autonomous cars. It's, autonomous robots. It's autonomous. There's a real range. Drones.
Yep.
What's your thought on the future of autonomy?
So if I'm running a car company today, there's two existential issues that I wake up every morning I think about, and probably go to bed thinking about them too. The first is autonomous cars, because I think we're heading towards a flip phone to iPhone moment, where if you can buy a car that will drive you for the same price you can drive a car that you have to drive, the market's going to move from the flip phone equivalent of cars to the iPhone equivalent of cars. And it's existential because when that happens, if you don't have that technology as a car manufacturer, you become Nokia, BlackBerry, or Motorola. And those companies' market caps didn't fall by half, they went to zero because they just didn't have the tech for the time. And so I think about autonomy is kind of the mother of all AI problems. It's super duper hard. As Jan LeCun says, I can teach a teenager to drive a car in 2 hours. Why has it taken us 20 years? It's really hard. And the second thing that I would wake up thinking about this existential is automated manufacturing. There are factories in China now that are called lights out factories. You may have heard lights out applied to Amazon warehouses. They're lights out because no humans have to be inside. China actually has lights out factories where raw material comes in one side, robots make the product, and finished goods come out the other side. And there's no plant manager. AI is the plant manager. So they literally have manufacturing that's advanced super far beyond us. And those are the two things I would think about every day. And both of those are AI problems to solve.
I think for time, I'm not going to ask you about Lululemon, but he's on the board of Lululemon. If you want a discount, talk to him. Stash. So GM, you're on the board of GM, but you're not a passive board member. I'm sure you're very involved. Is Mary a clone of Elon? How is she similar as the CEO of GM? How's she different? And it seems like GM is doing better at EVs than Ford. But what's your assessment?
So Mary's the best CEO, hands down, I've ever worked with. Hands down. She grew up in the plants. Her parents worked in the plants. She worked in the plants as a high schooler. She went to college in GM's internal college, became an engineer, and then went to Stanford Business School. And she ran product. She ran manufacturing. Her last job was she was running HR, and they tapped her to be the CEO. And it's turned out she's an amazing CEO. But she's first and foremost what a lot of great CEOs are. She's a product person. And so if you've seen the product lineup that she and her partner in crime, Mark Royce, have launched over the past 5 years, these are really compelling products. Like, these are like way better than my former company. And she is very agile and involved too. So one of the things I talk about in the book is if a CEO is involved in the core issues of the company on a weekly basis and teams have to report to that CEO, they tend to bring their A game to those meetings, and so you get forward progress every week.
And you had that with Elon.
I had that with Elon, and Mary does this too. And when I asked Mary why, she said, because my core job as the CEO is capital allocation. I can't allocate capital accurately unless I understand the implications of where that capital is going to go. So she's in those meetings. She's fantastic. And as a result, they've got really compelling product that's taken them from 0 to number 2 in the EV space.
Yep. This isn't Mary, but in the book, he references how he read a book that Sam Walton wrote about his business strategy, and that inspired him. You left Tesla and you started Delta Ventures, which I think is very interesting. Maybe tell us a little bit about it, and that leads to this AI moment. I think AI 5 years ago, I think people predicted what's happening now was 90 years away.
Yeah.
It's happening fast, and you have an interesting venture model that I don't think is replicated successfully other places. I think a lot of people have tried it and it hasn't worked, but you're getting some traction, and this kind of leads to an overall theme of we had the space race as we were growing up in the Cold War. Now we have sort of an AI race. And how are you contributing your leadership right now to the AI race in running Delta V, your venture studio, which I will point out has like like 25 people, none of them are investors. So you're hiring product people and creatives at a time to work with AI and build great companies.
Yeah, so I wanted to start a firm that I had 6 companies in a row. We started them from our kitchen table, scaled them, sold them to a public company. This is before I went to Tesla. And so I started to write playbooks on how you take a company from 0 to its first million, from its 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 500 million, et cetera. And I wanted to start a firm, and I was going to do this right as I was meeting Elon. I wanted to start a firm where we could follow these playbooks and create companies from scratch. And I was lucky I didn't start it then, because then I got to know all these incredibly world-class people at Tesla. And so we pulled that team together. We got the band back together from Tesla, and people followed me to Lyft. And we created this firm, DVX, where we start companies from scratch. We are the first CEOs, so this is a very different model. We build the product, we put it in market, we get it post revenue, and then we bring a CEO in who's been in that domain and really bent the curve. And we've been at this for 5 years. We've launched 17 companies out of this process, and we just got the numbers run at the end of the year. We're in the top 5% of venture firms of our vintage. So it's a model that's super unique, but it's working. And I pinch myself every day I get to work with these people and work on these problems. But to the core of your question, John, AI is at the core of each of these companies, because it has to be now. It wasn't 5 years ago when we started. It could be ancillary, but now it has to be core.
Yeah. So I am going to ask you at the end of this, will Tesla ever sell its car company? And I will ask you at the end of this, take us back to the earliest chapters of your life, what still shows up in how you lead today. But we're going to do that at the end. Now, Jon has published a book as of last Tuesday, and it's doing well, right?
It just reached #1 in business books on Amazon, which is amazing.
So
thank you if you bought it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to hand the floor to you to present this, and then I'm going to come back and ask you those 2 questions. I'm really excited to hand the floor to Jon, where he's going to basically walk you through his framing. And I bet this was a roadmap for you writing your book. So thank you for
let me borrow this from you.
Yeah,
So what I thought I'd do is maybe we'll call a little bit of an audible. I'm going to walk you through the framework real fast, and then I'm going to do something that I learned in Silicon Valley that I didn't learn in Boston. And that is, we literally have to face our employees every week or month, depending on the size of your company. We do all hands, and that's more common now in Boston, but it wasn't common when I was an entrepreneur in Boston. I went out to Silicon Valley, and all of a sudden we're doing an all hands every month with 20,000 people, where we got to face the music of their questions. No holds barred, AMAs, ask me anything. And so it often was a lot more interesting to the people to talk about what they wanted to talk about. So what I thought I'd do is like walk you through this real fast, and then we'll do that. Let you guys ask questions about stuff you're curious about, and then we can close with Jon's 2 questions. So the way this book came about is I got to know Walter Isaacson as he was writing the Elon book, and we spent enough time together where we developed a relationship. Then he asked me to come on his book tour on a couple of stops and interview him, which was like so cool to interview Walter Isaacson sitting on a couch. And as I did my research for that book tour, I found out that Walter was an accomplished CEO. And I knew him as an author, but I didn't do the Wayback Machine and figure out, oh, this guy ran Time at its peak. He was the Time CEO. And then he went and did a turnaround on CNN and fired Lou Dobbs and really turned that whole programming around. And so I asked him on the first night, I had 2 questions for him. And we can get into this first question later if you want. I said, you've written about Steve Jobs. I couldn't make my way through that book because I was so disgusted with him as a human. And now you've written about Elon. Do you believe, Walter, you have to be an asshole to be a successful CEO? And we can get into that later. And then my second question was, Steve had a really unique way of running Apple. That operating system still is imprinted on Apple. It's how they run today. And Elon's got a very unique operating system within Tesla. Why don't you write about this? You're a CEO, and we would all love to have the insights of this. And he said, it's because I don't write business books, Jon. I write character books. I want to be a camera on the wall, let you decide on the character, but I don't write business books. And we walked off stage, and he said, you need to write that book. And I said, I'm not your guy. I'm not an author. He said, I'll show you how to do that, but you would be the first direct report of Elon's to talk about this operating system. So what I'm going to describe to you is the operating system that we developed by making a ton of very serious mistakes over time, but we developed this framework that would eventually keep us from making those mistakes and then drive innovation at a very high rate. And so we asked ourselves this question, can innovation be scalable and repeatable? And we started to develop this framework that became known as the algorithm. It's got 5 steps, and it's got 3 secret ingredients that I talk about in the book. It starts with simplicity being the key. This is one of my favorite Einstein quotes. And part of Elon's magic, as I said, is to create big goals. So one of the conversations we were having one day was, hey, do you think we could sell cars online? This is 2015, 2016, and I said, no, I don't think we can sell $120,000 things sight unseen. But he gave me this challenge. He's like, I want you to increase digital sales 20x, which from 0 was a pretty easy assignment. So we started looking into this, and one of the first things I did was I said it takes 64 clicks to buy a car on Tesla's website. So Elon said, pull out the Domino's app. How many taps to get a pizza? And it was 10 at the time. He's like, let's set that as our goal. So that's several orders of magnitude reduction. Turns out that's hard. And 44 of the 64 clicks were in the financing process. So we had an unbelievable general counsel at the time. I sent him the auto loan doc, which is standard. And I said, here's a 12-page auto loan doc. Can you tell me which of these paragraphs are a requirement of law or regulation? So this is our first step in the algorithm. You just question like requirements that nobody else would be silly enough to question. He writes back and says, none of these paragraphs are a requirement of law or regulation. I said, what do you mean? He said, this is years of corporate attorneys building up paragraph after paragraph to protect their client, but none of this stuff is required. We could literally have a 1-paragraph loan that said, here's the price of the car, here's the interest rate, here's the term, therefore here's the monthly payment. And I'm like, we could have a 4-sentence? Yes, awesome. Let's get a bank on board. It took us eons to get a bank on board to do this, but we did. US Bank stepped up, a Minneapolis bank, and so we were able to get 44 of the clicks out. Today, it's still the only car manufacturer that you can buy a car with that few clicks. So we developed this first step of the algorithm, which is question every requirement. You've heard the Model X doors where you've got to really question, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. And then once you get the base requirements boiled down to actually what's real, what's required by law, physics, or safety, those were our 3 guardrails, then you can now say, what do we really, really need in this product? And so I would put the product features on a board with a team, and I would say, circle the ones the customer was willing to pay us for, and those are the only ones we're going to build. So there's this famous story of Steve Jobs when he and James Higa get into a room to design the original iPod. Steve would do this first. His first step in his algorithm is define the 2 things that have to be true about the product, and then don't worry about anything else. And so for the iPod, he and James came up with the requirements for the engineers and designers, which was 1,000 songs, and you could get to the song you wanted in 4 seconds. Sounds simple enough. None of the tech existed at the time to hold 1,000 songs. No OS and chip were fast enough to get to the song in 4 seconds. But if you really boil a product down, then you go slow at the beginning to do that, and then you can go super fast. And you can delete anything else that comes up. So his engineers would constantly come to him and say, hey, Samsung's MP3 player has an FM radio. We should have, and he would say, is that 1,000 songs or 4 seconds? No, it's not in the product. Next. And so we have teams that go through these exercises. Mary actually goes through these exercises at GM. This one you might find pretty interesting. If you stand in a car factory and drew a 50-yard line in the car factory, everything to your right is building the skeleton. So it's about 300 robots welding 300 parts to make the skeleton of the car. That's called the chassis. And if you look to your left, there are about 7,000 people that are hanging parts off that skeleton. That's called general assembly. And so one day, Elon came to our management team meeting, looked at Doug Field and I, Doug's head of engineering, and he said, I want you guys to figure out how to take 50% of the cost out of manufacturing the car. So this isn't like take 5% out, it's like take 50% out. So Doug and I get on a scaffolding, and we're standing above the body shop where all these robots are working in concert, and these are big things, as you can see. It's big KUKA robots. And Doug says, I have an idea for eliminating half the factory. And I was like, what is it? And he said, I just want to run some calcs at home because I know the physics are almost impossible, but meet me in the morning. So we meet in the morning, we're in a conference room, and he rolls a Matchbox car across the desk. He's like, this is how we're going to do it. And I said, this is a Matchbox car. What are you talking about? He said, these things are casted, not welded. And I said, Doug, I get that. They're casted because they can be, because if you take molten aluminum into a mold the size of your thumb, you can apply enough air pressure for that mold to hold until the aluminum cools. But you can't do that for a half of a car because that will explode. There's no machine that's strong enough on Earth to hold that pressure. It would blow up the factory, literally. That's why it hasn't been done. And I was presenting the known supposed requirements and scientific understanding, but he was like, no, I think we could experiment our way to doing this. Do you have anything we could melt? And now we're like 8-year-old boys. So I'm like, I do, actually. We've got hundreds of scratch and dent wheels that are made of aluminum that we take out back the plant for the recycler to pick up every week. He's like, awesome. Let's melt those. I'll get a smelter. We'll get 4 core engineers that I know can work on this problem, and we'll start to melt stuff. So we're like chucking wheels into this smelter, and we're pouring molten aluminum into these little molds. And we could get something as big as our thumb. And then we got something as big as our hand, and then we got something about this big and this big. And eventually, over 11 months, they invented the machines that can now cast cars. And so the way the first half of the factory looks now, this is Austin Model Y assembly, is that there's just 2 parts that come together. 50% of the factory is eliminated, but 2/3 of the CapEx was in that 50% with all those robots. So now you have real material advantage. We invented these machines in 2017, and car manufacturers are just getting them today. Like Ford's getting their first ones, Toyota's getting their first ones. So an 8-year advantage on what Doug created, just by questioning requirements and deleting every step possible. Then we simplify. I'm going to fly through this. You guys heard the story of the factory. There's a story of Lululemon in the book of creating the Olympic apparel. And then, as I mentioned, you apply speed to a process, and it reveals all of its warts, and it helps you get rid of the warts. And then once you've got a process optimized, then you automate it last. Amazon, you might remember, started with a website where Bezos, Wilkie, and the original team took orders off the website. They would run down to a local bookstore in Seattle, buy the book at retail, put it in a box so that they could map the process. They weren't going to invest in the process until they could map it. DoorDash got started the same way. 5 Stanford CS majors in a dorm room have this idea for DoorDash. They decide not to automate anything. They want to understand the business first. So they put a PDF of menus up online with a phone number that rings in their dorm room. They would run down the street into downtown Palo Alto, order the food, pay for the food, deliver the food, and eventually they automated once they got the process down. So this isn't like something that's super weird for tech companies to do. It's kind of de rigueur now. So those are the 5 steps of the algorithm. When we talk about 3 cultural ingredients, one is stretching your engineers and your team's view of the product to include what the customer actually goes through. So cars throughout history car manufacturers are about designing and manufacturing cars. They don't sell them. That goes to independent dealers, and they don't service them, and they don't fuel them for sure. And we had to stretch engineers' minds to say, we're going to design the car, we're going to manufacture the car, we're going to sell the car in our own stores, and we're going to provide the fueling. And that was super controversial, where engineers would tell us, we're not Exxon, we're not Chevron, we're not Shell, we shouldn't do this. And we said, we're not going to have adoption unless the fueling experience is elegant. And so that's where the supercharger network came from. And I mentioned the weekly accountability and urgency that Elon injects, and Mary's now doing too. And then lastly, the last secret ingredient is a slang that's used a lot in Silicon Valley. It's called eating your own dog food, which means using your own product. I was in a room about this size with bank CEOs, major bank CEOs, and I asked them the question, I said, raise your hand if you've used your bank's app in the last week. And no hands went up. And I said, I knew that was going to be the answer, because I'm a customer of 2 of your banks, and your apps are terrible. And if you use them, you wouldn't live for another day without calling the engineers and saying, you've got to change this. And we literally did that at Tesla. We would pull a car off the line every night, drive it home, drive it back the next day. Engineers would have notes within a half hour of us getting there, so that we have this daily feedback loop. I wear Lulu clothes all the time. I visit at least 2 Lulu stores a week as a board member because I want to create the feedback loop with the senior management team of what I'm seeing that they can't see, because everything's prepped for them when they get there. But these stores have no idea who I am. So those are the principles that you'll see in the algorithm. And now we'll
For time, I want to just finish up.
All right, cool.
So this is a very impressive guy, entrepreneur. Was at Tesla, Lyft, now doing venture building on a number of boards that help shape the global economy. I'm curious, given that AI is changing everything, can you comment? Do you think Tesla will ever sell their car company and focus on other things, or do you think that's core to Tesla?
I think it's core in the sense that Elon wants to use autonomy for cars as kind of a ramrod to make sure that they're progressing on AI, general AI, as fast as they can. So you take the hardest problem in AI, which is arguably autonomous cars. You put that in the center of this group, and you say, like, you got to solve this. And the tooling that gets created to solve that problem, they've created the world's biggest cluster of GPUs, largely focused on this problem. It just drives the whole company faster to have that big problem sitting in the middle. And I don't think he's going to let that go until they're well past solving it.
So let me just a follow-up to that. Do you think a big part of your book is question everything? It's how to approach life. Now that we are entering a world where we have a symbiotic relationship with AI. I mean, the architecture of the internet allowed things to move around, but now our species is really going to navigate the world a little differently than we've ever had before. Does your algorithm still hold up? Does it get accelerated as a result, or do you have to tweak the algorithm? And the algorithm was based on a time before AI kind of was being woven into our society.
I do think you got to keep tweaking these systems. So this isn't a permanent framework. It's a framework that has to evolve and will evolve, I think, over time. But you see Elon still doing this in the world of AI. Mm-hmm. So like people told him you couldn't have 100,000 clustered NVIDIA data center, and because you can't power it, you can't network it, you can't, and they questioned every requirement, and they built it in 8 months to the point where Jensen was like, I don't even know how these guys did this. So the framework holds, I think, but it will definitely be tweaked. This isn't a permanent thing.
Here's another follow-up. A lot of people think white-collar jobs are going to, look very differently, and a lot are going to be eliminated. I've heard you speak saying that actually AI could create jobs that we didn't even exist. What's your take on the outlook of the future of work? And
my general framework is that humans are really good at seeing the first layer of, or the first order effect, which is job destruction in this case. We're really bad at seeing the second and third order effects because we can't see the future. And so Elon and I have a little bit of this discourse going on where he uses this example of in the 1950s, all the skyscrapers in New York were filled with people doing human spreadsheets. So human calculations. And then the spreadsheet comes out and eliminates all those jobs. We could see that. But then I don't let Elon let the story in there because I say, okay, the skyscrapers in New York are not empty today. And there are more jobs on Wall Street than ever. What happened? Well, it turns out with a spreadsheet, you could make now ubiquitous and almost real time this calculation called Black-Scholes. And if you could make that calculation readily available, now you can create new financial products, derivatives, loan syndications, et cetera, that you couldn't trade before. And now you had the information to trade. So entire exchanges and commodities that are now worth tens of trillions of dollars got created that created a bunch of jobs. Nobody could see that pre-spreadsheet, pre-VisiCalc. And so I have yet to find a technological revolution or a technical breakthrough that has resulted in lower GDP for humanity. Go all the way back to the printing press, go to the wheel, go back as far as you want. Name one that is lower GDP and lower jobs. You can't. Why? Because we're super resilient about finding opportunities on the other side of this. And I think right now we're staring into this wall that we can't see through. We can see the first order effect, but we don't know what the next order effect. So I'm not one that's out on the limb saying, I think white collar jobs are going away. I think white collar jobs are going to change a lot and they're going to look a lot different, but I don't think we're going to have this mass unemployment where we have to have UBI and those sorts of things.
When your children, and if they have grandchildren, if you have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, when they talk about you, what do you hope they say that mattered to you?
I'm going to steal one because I watched Warren Buffett get interviewed a couple of months ago, and he was asked the same question, and his answers at the very end of the interview said, "I just want to be known as kind."
Take us back to the earliest memory of your life that still shows up in how you lead today.
The soil in the Midwest gets very, very hard in the summer because it gets baked in the sun. And we had our family had a dog, and my dad wanted to put a new stake in the backyard so the dog could run around on a chain. And he sent me back there like as a 5-year-old with a sledgehammer and a stake, metal stake, and said, "Go pound this into the ground." And I would pound that thing, and it would just like ricochet off the ground. And he would look at me and say, "Keep trying. Don't give up. I'll be back in a half hour. Do not give up." And it took me about an hour to even get the thing started into the ground, and I was a sweaty mess. But I remember I remember getting it in the ground, and I remember the look on his face. And I can still see that look today. But I also remember every time I looked out in that backyard and saw that dog having fun, I was like, I could do that.